Hiring managers of Reddit, what are some telltale signs that your candidate is making things up? Story 1. As someone who has hired many technicians in IT positions, I'm amazed at how many people would fake highly technical knowledge. I remember I needed a telecom engineer with very specific knowledge of a very specific voice system. I was getting suspicious of this one candidate, so I started asking about the exact syntax of command lines, and this guy was actually throwing out made-up commands. I was both fascinated and annoyed. Story 2. One woman I interviewed literally took a pause and read the answers to the questions straight off of Google Online Skype interview. I noticed it because they were really weird pauses and Googled it myself and literally followed along like subtitles. Story 3. When you're doing a video interview and you can watch them try to Google stuff in the reflection of their glasses. Small props for being clever though, he was paraphrasing the question back to me as a way to use the voice assistant. Story 4. I work at an architecture firm and I kid you not, a candidate attached one of our projects in her portfolio. Exactly same 3D rendering. It wasn't even listed on the company website. How she got it is still baffling. The hiring manager just played along. Story 5. Maybe more of an answer about general competence, but in my observation the smartest people are comfortable saying they don't know something or acknowledge limitations in their knowledge or experience. Naive or bluffing candidates want to project an air of knowing everything, which is implausible. Another signal is how eager they are to go into depth. I interview programmers and technical staff, so I like to ask them about the project they are most proud of. I listen carefully and ask a few questions about how they worked through some thorny tech aspects. I understand that software is a team effort, but the legitimate contributors are eager to talk about technical details of what they built. The ones who just attended meetings and rarely contributed much struggle to say anything of substance. That is quite telling in my view. Story 6. We had someone come in and interview for a call center position. The resume claimed they had 3 years working in a call center in town. When she arrived, she was very lethargic and couldn't answer basic interview questions. When asked what she did at call center A, she literally just said call center rep. When asked to elaborate on her duties, she repeated the same thing. No details were given. She even claimed that she has never been asked such hard and detailed questions during a job interview before. We didn't make it past 3 very basic questions. We have concluded she lied about working at call center A, or at least she certainly didn't work anywhere near 3 years there. Story 7. I speak enough gringo Spanish to get by, and back in the day when I was a hiring manager, if anybody put fluent in Spanish on their resume, I'd walk into the interview room and introduce myself and start the interview in Spanish. The looks of panic from the kids who'd taken, like, 3 years of high school Spanish before college were priceless. Edit a word. Story 8. Having interviewed quite a few candidates, I've come to accept that many people will try to BS their way through something they have a dabbling knowledge in. That's alright. When I ask a direct question and the person is trying to work it out on the fly to come up with an answer that sounds correct, I get some great insight into their troubleshooting abilities. This only works if you know what it is you are talking about though. If you've never heard of Ansible, please don't try to tell me what a great database application it is. At the end of the day though, my favorite answer and the one most likely to get a candidate with limited experience onto the next phase is to just admit you don't know, but that you'll look it up, Google it, and be able to answer the question next time. Most recent candidate we hired did just that. I passed the question ID, asked them on to the next person to have time to do the interview, and they were asked again. They must have had the right answer this time because I'm training them now. Story 9. I had one guy who listed himself as XXX manager at YYY company at ZZZ location from 2007 to 2011. The thing is, that was my position and title and location. Story 10. At a job fair I told people that we were doing a lot of work in the programming language Ballrave, and asked if they had any experience with it. A disappointingly high number talked about using it for classes in college, and writing some side programs in it after they heard about it, and so on. They must have felt silly later when they Googled it and discovered that there is no programming language Ballrave. ID just made it up as a way to tell who was lying to me. Edit. One of my coworkers said she wasn't happy with the dishonest part of that, so we changed it to do you have any experience with Ballrave. Edit 2. About 34 of people said something to the effect that they'd never heard of it. Of those, most said something like what's it like, I know C and Java pretty well, and I use Python all the time, so if it's like one of those I could probably pick it up without too much trouble. About half of those were good enough on other points that they got phone interviews. Story 11. A common one I see a lot is work history that is grandiose and excessively overqualified, especially if it's difficult or impossible to verify. I am in a high immigration city and deal with lots of international candidates, and have met a vast amount of people with titles like Executive Director of Worldwide Distribution or Senior Vice President of Global Operations from a company in Bulgaria or Cambodia or Dubai with no phone number or English website. The position descriptors and skills on these resumes usually look copy and pasted from a template, and additionally, these people often claim master or doctorate level educations that are equally difficult to verify. I have had more than one CFO interview for an entry-level position who had never seen a profit loss statement before. Story 12. We had an interview candidate who said their Excel skills were 9.5 out of 10 and they knew how to do pivot tables. They literally started crying when we brought out a laptop for the skills test and asked them to make a pivot table out of sample data. Story 13. Star question situation task action result are designed to root out people that don't have real experience, Or if they do have experience, the questions will expose their level of skill and work personality. If I ask, can you handle underperforming reps, you can bullshit a vague answer easily. But if I say, tell me about a time when you had to coach an underperforming rep, what was the scenario, what actions did you take, and what was the result, that's much harder to bullshit your way through. If you are making things up, the only way to get through those questions is to be vague, which is why you will see vagueness as a big tell in most of these comments. Story 14. Well, I was testing a potential welder once. He showed up in shorts, muscle shirt, and flip-flops to do a weld test and interview. I turned him away citing safety concerns about his wardrobe, and never rescheduled. Figure he was too dumb for me to deal with. Story 15. I once asked to a supposedly experienced front-end developer, can you code valid HTML? Her reply was more than enough yes. All my software is legal. Story 16. When you ask them about something on their resume and they use the term we in their answer without ever saying what Husha actually did. It says here that you increased market share by 15 on your last product. What did you do to contribute you that market share? Well, we increased training and did this and that and the other thing. My question was what you, as an individual contributor, did to increase your market share. Well, we worked as a team, but what did you do? Good interview answers discuss what the team did and what the individual contributed. If the individual can't articulate what they contributed, they likely contributed little to nothing. Likewise, if they take all the credit, then they are also likely full of. Story 17. Agree with many of the comments here. My own view 1. No examples, just vague conversation or talking points. 2. Avoids or can't answer follow-up questions. 3. Multiple interviewers hear a different story and take away. I had one person tell me they lived and breathes operations and another interviewer they never worked in operations before. Do you think we don't talk before making a decision? Story 18. I don't see a lot of things people are totally making up, but it's easy to spot when they are heavily embellishing work history. It's totally fine to have worked in a restaurant or retail store. I'm hiring for entry-level professional positions, so you expect that kind of work history. They'll take your app a lot more seriously if you focus on the customer service aspect of the job and don't try to make it sound like you, the cashier, were running the place. Story 19. Sketchy job history, or several jobs in a short time span. I had a woman once that had around 10 jobs over the last 2-5 years. She claimed to have a wealth of knowledge from all of these different opportunities to learn. She talked around most questions, and long story short, I found out that she and a friend would apply at companies as minorities, and then quit and sue for discrimination. She had sued 8 of the 10, bullet dodged. Story 20. I swear there are trolls in this thread just trying to up our confidence. The candidate was sweating, which indicated that they were lying uncomfortably, so we turned them away on the spot. They used the pronoun we once, so we knew they didn't contribute anything to the team. They told stories. I mean, Jesus, what can we do to make our actual experience and qualifications seem legitimate? Story 21. 1. They ramble and the answers make absolutely no sense. 2. They never answer the question asked. They talk about something they are comfortable with in the hopes I don't notice that they didn't answer. 3. Give them an easy test. One that, if you knew your skill, you should pass easily and within 5 minutes. If it takes longer, you either lied on your resume or at what you say you are good at. Story 22. Telltale signs that the candidate is making stuff up makes for great stories. But it isn't what bothers me. What bothers me is that I am convinced that there are people that are great interviewers and poor interviewers. My boss hired a great interviewer. Months later we escorted him out of the building because he was beyond worthless. I wish I knew how many rock stars we passed on because they sucked at interviewing. Story 23. I always just assume resumes are a fluffed up ball of half-truths, that they make themselves appear better and more competent useful on. I usually like to see how long someone worked somewhere for. If they're rocking 6 jobs in a year, that's a sign this person might be off, but if they have longevity at wherever they work, that holds some weight, I would say. As for talking to them, it's just a matter of getting a read on them. Life isn't like a movie where everything you say or ask will prompt a witty response or a great 5-minute story. Life is filled with awkward pauses and M's. If they do have the gift of gab, that's great, but also means they can fudge things much easier because they know how to work people verbally. So keep your guard up. Story 24. Not a hiring manager, but I sit on hiring committees from time to time. My pet peeve and telltale sign that someone is full of bullshit is when you ask them a question and they just redefine the question terms. Example. Q. What kind of metrics would you use to analyze the success or failure of a certain program? I feel like metrics are very important for analyzing the success of a certain program. Metrics are measurables that are then analyzed to see how well something is working. It's very important to insert your business here. Yeah, no, now answer the question. I always mark these people harshly for these kinds of answers. And my God, do we get them all the time. Please, if you're being asked a question, do not redefine the question. That is not an answer. The worst part is that I then have to explain to everyone else on the hiring committee why that was a bad answer. Most just nod and say, wow, she knows that X is very important to Y. It's like, yeah, of course it is, we just asked the question. We wouldn't have asked it if it wasn't important. Story 25. For phone or Skype interview. If they come back to a technical question they bombed earlier and answer it with a textbook, sometimes literally response, they've had time to look up the answer while the interview continued. A lot of industries has some easy softball questions that nobody with real experience should struggle with, even under stress. How many clustered indexes can you have on a table? Miss that one but rattle off a perfect description of every known isolation level without drawing a breath. That's reading it out of a book, not experience. Story 26. At our software company, we first screened potential candidates through a phone call with technical recruiters. One applicant did exceptionally well on the phone interview, answering all questions with apparent ease, so we decided to interview in person. The in-person interview went shockingly horrible. The candidate was unable to answer even the most basic questions. After a few attempts to simplify questions, I finally decided to ask him what was going on. Turns out we had interviewed his computer scientist's son on the phone, and he was simply hoping to skirt by the in-person interview. With 20 years of experience in construction, lost his job. I tried to hire his son, but he wasn't interested. Story 27. Trying to turn questions into a conversation without answering them with any actual content. Example stories aren't compelling or don't flow naturally. Story 28. I used to do phone interviews to screen candidates for higher-up recruiters. The jobs I screened for required proficiency in English, and for one of the jobs, this was really important because it could be potentially dangerous, and most of the people in the country were native English speakers. The proficiency was met if the interviewer could understand the questions and adequately respond. For one particular candidate, I had gotten through the basic questions that really only needed a yes or no, including a question about understanding the necessity of understanding English for the position. But as soon as I started asking more in-depth questions, he would give me very short, grammatically poor sentences that didn't elaborate in the way I had asked. I also started hearing a lot of background noise and soon heard people whispering responses to him. Based on the job history and past residences, I figure he didn't actually know English and that his family was frantically trying to Google what I asked and was trying to help him respond. I feel bad that he was likely an immigrant just doing his best to get any sort of entry-level position. But safety is safety, and if you can't understand warnings and emergency announcements in the predominant language of your workplace, you're more liable to get hurt. Story 29. Man, I remember for an entry technician job they made do all these IQ tests and then asked me how to rewire a big calibration machine or scales or whatever it was I forgot. Bro, I couldn't do it. Like, that's literally the job. I needed that job so I could learn. It was a nightmare and was embarrassing. I was so unprepared and didn't realize job interviews were that serious. What graduate knows how to actually do the job out of college, man? In college we literally learn how to learn. And then these HR people come up with impossible standards to live up to. Have 3 years experience post-graduate as an entry-level job. Then they turn around and say it's okay to apply for jobs even if you have no years experience. Then they wonder why people lie or highly inflate their abilities on their resume. Because people are getting desperate after searching for jobs for months to years to not even hear callbacks. Edit. I think I was wrong when I wrote this. I only have myself to blame. I should have been prepared for that interview. I understand now and have since actually learned how to interview properly. Still having trouble with applying and having a graduate resume though, so I'm still frustrated, but the point is to try and just improve and not take it too personally from now on. Story 30. I once interviewed someone who said they spoke English. When it was time for the interview she only spoke Russian. I happened to have someone who spoke Russian and English, so they translated the entire interview. Have some solid answered, so I hired her anyway. She worked for us for 4 years and by the time she left she knew English. Story 31. So I was sitting next to my boyfriend while he was giving a phone interview and the guy was clearly Googling answers. He would ask him to repeat almost every question then pause before a textbook answer, and at one point he asked him to spell the word, but after knowing the spelling knew the exact definition. Story 32. My brother was brought in to consult with a couple managers on a panel interview for an architect role. The interviewee ended up lying a few times on her experience on the interview, which my brother pointed out. The manager said he'd talked to her about it. She admitted to the lying, so the manager thought that somehow made up for it. My brother protested to leadership and they decided to have a larger panel interview with a VP present. To give her another chance, she lied again. She admitted it during the interview. They hired her anyway. My brother actually lodged a complaint with HR for it, since it seemed like she was held above other candidates because she was Indian and leadership was Indian. Nothing happened. Story 33. Whenever I interview people I always ask offhand questions with warning right before I ask. I want to pick your ability to think here. It's okay if you don't know. The point is to see if there's any thought process in the event of equipment failure. I work in biotech. Some will admit lack of knowledge and that's perfectly okay and expected. Some others who really don't know will still try to fluff, so I start to get more technical. If they continue, they're out. Story 34. If they try to downplay a task that you know is actually difficult. For example, I worked at a hotel and whenever we had people apply to be housekeepers and claim to have experience, but when you tell them how many rooms they would have to clean a day they would go 17. I could do 20 to 25 easy but never ask how big the rooms were. Just basic stuff where they talk a big game and overplay their hand. Story 35. Most of the people in my industry work for one or two big players based on their geography at some point in their career. I get people that claim to work for X company all the time, especially in the early 2000s. Issue for them is was a project manager for a decade and did most of the hiring. I love to ask them their experiences working there, throwing out names or projects and seeing how they respond. The commitment to the charade is amazing. Story 36. Anything along the lines of expert in Excel for a standard front office position. No one is an expert in Excel. There are some people who are incredibly talented in it, but they will never call themselves experts because they understand the massive potential of the program. Edit. I'm saying this for jobs like secretary, admin assistant and executive assistant. I'm sure there are people doing other types of jobs that require certification or high level of knowledge. You're not who I'm referring to. Story 37. I interviewed one person recently that has had 7 different contracts in the past 4 years with 7 different employers. She told us flat out that everyone that she works for offers her permanent work. She has been looking for permanent work, but yet she is so liked by these places and never gets it. I know they all have hired permanent people since and even have positions open, but the big sign is that she did not list any of them as a reference. If they loved her and could not find her work, they would be surely happy to find her work elsewhere. Story 38. Everything's just really vague. Results are never backed up by numbers. They can't describe exact actions they took. They use shite loads of managers' jargon that often feels unrelated to the question. Story 39. Everything about the interview game is bullshit. When you're young with 0 experience, you have to make up or else nobody will look at your resume. When you have work experience, all you have to do is list examples and tell the truth. Finding a job when you're young is about bullshitting. Finding a job when you're older is about how much money your knowledge and experience can generate for the company. That's it. Story 40. I hire people for a fast food job all the time, so it really doesn't have many requirements. It's quite interesting when at the interview some people will add all these other places they have worked. Of course they don't have contact numbers on any of them. Especially when you ask a customer service related question, something along the lines of a customer received the wrong pizza and is calling us unhappy about it. How do you handle the situation when they've worked half a dozen fast food jobs but stumble over it super hard? It's suspicious. I don't even care if they don't know or if they have work experience, but if they seem disorganized or appear to be straight up lying, I won't hire them. Story 41. Eve been running kitchens for a long time, and anytime I get an interview who's talking like Gordon Ramsay or postulating about how good they are and how inspired by Michelin-starred chefs they are, it's a massive red flag that this idiot's cooking experience has been 90 YouTube videos, 8 home cooking and 2 standing around looking at his phone on the line. Raging passion for the food industry is carved into you and it shows in your people skills, cooking skills and work ethic. It doesn't come from calling your coworkers idiots and pretending you know better than your head chef. Story 42. I was the store manager for a Korean woman and I ran her anime pop culture type store. The way she wanted me to conduct interviews was how they do them in a lot of Asian countries. Hire them for a day and see how they do. This is all well and good and I prefer to watch people and see if they are good for the job, but this is America, and if you tell someone to come in for training they think they got the job. So they would come in for their interview training day and I'd ask all the normal questions and add in what anime or gaming stuff do they like to see, if they are knowledgeable in the stuff they like, and if they are willing to learn about other stuff they haven't seen or played. A lot of the time I'd ask if they play NEM, MO type games, and if so what is their favorite, and I had people telling me yeah I play WoW. I ask what's their favorite dungeon and they go on making stuff up, or they would tell me about the Leroy Jenkins dungeon, which means they probably haven't played but have just watched that vid. There was one guy though that I thought was bullshitting me and I asked him what server he was on this time to really see if he knew any of the servers. He said Drendon. This is the server I was a guild leader on, so I said oh I've heard of that server. What guild were you part of? I might know it. He said it was one of the biggest on the server, so I played dumb and threw out a few small name guilds to see if he was telling the truth or not, and he said no to all of them. I said my guild's name and he said yeah that's the one. I asked what his screen name was and he told me. I actually remembered him from when I was the guild leader, so I said hey do you know Faye? He goes yeah that was the leader. Why? I said you're hired, but I'm pissed that you ignored me every time I asked if you wanted to join raid night. This will be proof that you can listen to my directions for once. Off topic, but this question reminded me of this story. Story 43. Not a hiring manager, but I covered my boss for an interview for whatever reason he had. The guy I interviewed had a degree in math, and the field I work in needs close to 0 of what you learn in a mathematics degree. I would know, because I have a degree in math. I interviewed for the job because I had networking connections tied to the field, but I was super confused as to how someone else like me landed at the same place as me, so I asked him about it. Turns out that asking basic questions about a field you actually know about is very revealing. What was your favorite subject in math? Oh, I really liked calculus. Well, calculus is very broad. What specifically did you like? Something in analysis. Visually scrambling. Yeah, I meant analysis, complex analysis, real analysis, functional analysis. Oh well, you know, I mainly focused on applied math, so I didn't really take those classes. You wouldn't take real analysis in an applied math track. That sounds odd. I had a bunch of interesting questions I wanted to ask him, but I decided to cut almost every question I prepared out the window. Also, if you put some bullshit I know how to code in X language, when you know, well, that you're not going to need it in the field you applied. You better be sure you can answer basic questions about it. Story 44. I got my current position through an apprenticeship. The thing was 6 months into the 18-month apprenticeship it became obvious I could do the job role entirely by myself, but my manager was a bit hesitant to allow this for reasons known only to him. 12 months and we had a situation, serious illness in one of my mentors, whereby I had to fly solo and just do the job. This turned into me doing the job full-time for the final 6 months. Came to interview for a full-time position against some very strong, highly qualified in our field candidates. I babbled and babbled until the very end of the interview when I said am I allowed to say I've been doing the job for the past 6 months with glowing feedback. My manager laughed. One of my mentors simply said I would if I were you, going on for 6 years in the job now. Very glad I said it. Story 45. I'm a college junior that's unsuccessfully interviewed for a couple internships so far. Any advice from people that have been successful other than just be yourself? Edit. Currently studying in the risk management and insurance industry. Story 46. I have found that if I give people enough rope they will either hang themselves or tie a beautiful knot. I leave a lot of negative space in the conversation, and people tend to fill it because they want the interview to go smoothly. It's what they fill it with that lets you know about them. If I am not an expert in this specific job, I try to have someone sit in. That is, I have had interviews where I had an SME sit in, and when the interview was over I thought the candidate was good and the SME tells me that they are completely full of, some people are pleasant people, they just don't have the technical knowledge. So it's good to have someone smarter than them in the room. Story 47. I've done some hiring and I like to ask, is there anything in the job description that you have doubts about being able to perform? The person I picked had some questions about QuickBooks. Honest answer, and it was a very minimal part of the job, so I moved on. One guy answered by telling me he had no doubts or questions at all about any aspect of the job. Unlikely but possible scenario. He's being honest and is overqualified. Moderately likely scenario. He didn't read the job description entirely and didn't know what to ask. Most likely scenario. He's full of and is just feeding me what I want to hear. Story 48. We've had an astonishing number of people rate themselves a 9 or 10 in proficiency for PowerPoint, and then when asked what they used PowerPoint for at their previous job they reply something wild. Top answers have been, emailing with staff, writing reports, organizing meetings with clients. Story 49. I was interviewing prospects for a video editor position quite a few years ago. I asked him if there was an Avid editor. Avid is a video editing software. He said, and I am not making this up, yes, very avid, I love to edit. Technically he wasn't lying, didn't get hired though. Story 50. Nothing. Good ones can fake anything. I found behavioral questions. What did you do when you were in situation X? Questions work better than technical ones because experiences are way harder to make up than technical facts. It's way easier to spot BS with behavioral questions. Also, we usually do a lab tour and a lunch with candidates that are off the record, but there's always an understanding that it's not a formal scored interview, but it's still a lab tour and lunch with a current employee or two. Hitting on one, let alone both, of my engineers over lunch is a DQ. Asking during the lab tour what our internet policy is because at my current job I'm so good that I get my work done in less than an hour a day and want to be able to slack off the rest of the time is a very quick DQ. Both actually happened to my candidates I was helping interview or trying to hire. Story 51. Honestly, I would always do some internet snooping on them beforehand and then ask questions I already know the answer to. Don't post rants about your previous employer on Facebook, folks. Edit. Good lord. Everyone seems concerned with the Facebook comment and potential discrimination. First of all, if you think your employer has never looked at your Facebook, then you need to grow up. I was referring to one instance where a woman said she quit her last job and the top result when you googled her name was a Facebook post about being fired and accused of stealing. Story 52. I still don't think my hiring manager has it figured out. This is the cycle. Decent interview, get hired, work one shift, fail to exist ever again, go back to collecting unemployment quite likely. Story 53. Anyone who works in a tech role, seriously, our recruiters will bring in anyone who checks off enough boxes under our required skills. They are easily fooled. Trying to fool the person who works with these systems on a daily basis ain't gonna happen though. It's easy to tell who's been there before. It's even easier to spot someone who is confused by completing a basic task. Also, important for the college kids, when companies hire for junior entry-level roles they fully expect most of the applicants to have slim to no experience. I personally look for kids who are motivated and have the problem-solving mindset. There are intangible things that will tell me if you'll be good at learning the job or not, so don't panic if you don't click most of the boxes on the application. Story 54. I received some resumes from immigrants from India who gave me their resumes together. I look over both of them to see that they are the exact same resume, just copied and pasted. The only differences being their names and contact info. At this point I can see they're lying and throw their resumes in the OL shredder. This has happened more than once, at least 5 to 6 times. I laughed and then get disappointed with how stupid they must think I would be for figuring I wouldn't notice. Story 55. At my company they were doing an online interview to someone on India. When they started making him technical questions, they noticed the audio went out of sync. They paid closer attention and realized that in fact he was not talking, he was trying to lip-sync someone else who was in the room with him answering the questions. They stopped the interview instantly. He wasn't hired and neither was his more knowledgeable friend. Story 56. Gonna get lost in the comments, but my story is the opposite, so to speak. I was interviewed as a new driver. The CEO noticed in the section hobbies it said web designer. I had it in hobbies as it was a work in progress, still learning, nowhere near for a job type position. Anyway, the CEO was asking about SEO stuff and I was a little confused until it clicked. He meant SEO. As soon as I knew what he meant I nodded and said yup, sure I know that, not having a clue what SEO was apart from its search engine optimization, and that you rank better in Google with it. I was hired as SEO. 3 months I went from knowing basics to knowing keyword research and how it work in relation with AdWords and X amount per page, etc. Anyway, SEO requires a bit of funding. CEO said no. I did my best and got 3 or 4 of their 20-page website to page 1 of Google. It was enough to have them noticed. The monthly landing on certain pages were up over 1,000. I created new pages, such as Meet the Team, Contact Us, and forwarded to certain emails depending who they wanted. Anyhow, for months in and CEO is unhappy he is not seeing results fast enough and fires me. I told him with no funding I had limited options. Before I left I wrote my name and some comments into the code. I printed off my progress. All 30-odd pages or so of it. I had spreadsheets of before and after rankings. I still have it somewhere, but I'd have to dig it out. I enjoyed the role. I bent over backwards and late nights to learn that job. I was the only SEO guy. For those that are interested, I've not tried signing up for Moz to see how they rank now. But I'm sure it wouldn't be too hard anyway. That's my story of the reverse on what OP asked, I guess. Edit CEO would not let me put my name to any of the pages on the front end, so I hid it in back end. Manager, do you speak French? Guy or girl? Yeah. Manager, c'est quoi tes disponibilités pour la semaine? Guy or girl? Sorry. Story 57. I was a co-manager and I organized the interviews while the other co-manager gave the interviews. I brought a candidate to the office and left him with the co-manager for the interview. 5 minutes later, I see the candidate walk out the door. I think to myself, geez, what the happened? The co-manager comes up to me and he says that was one for the books. I asked him what responsibilities he had at the most recent employer he had listed on his resume, UPS. He said, I don't work at UPS. Then I asked him about a position he had a couple of years ago and he said he never heard of the company that was listed on his resume. Finally I just asked him if he made all of this up. He apologized, said yes, and got up and left. Story 58. We had a gal that interview for a project coordinator position. On her resume, she's listed that she went to USC and got a degree in business administration. So I asked her if she liked the Marshall School of Business and she replied that she did not go to the Marshall School of Business, that she went to USC. SHE had no idea that the USC Business School is called the Marshall School of Business. Typo SHE.